so much for joining SheLeads today. I am so excited to have you on the show and just learn from you and to share with others. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So Eileen, you are a global consultant, speaker, and trainer. You've led leadership, innovation, entrepreneurship workshops worldwide, as well as STEM workshops to young girls. And you're also an investor at Golden Seeds, where you guys focus on women leaders and female founders. And even prior to all of this, you also have extensive experience in program management. Specifically, you were at Symantec for 8 years as a director of program management. So such an honor to have you on the show, and I'm excited to get to know you and your story more. So just to get started, let's go to the beginning. You were my age, 21, 22 years old. How did you navigate your career path? What questions were you asking yourself to know, okay, this is what I should go into?
I was, even at that age, very interested in travel. And I had a very hard time staying focused in school and took off and started traveling. So,
yeah.
So back when it felt very safe and comfortable to be a single young woman hitchhiking, I was out hitchhiking across the U.S., across Canada, and not doing the straight after high school, go to university. And so by the time I got that out of my system and came back and it was time to go to school, I needed to work. So I ended up working full-time and going to school part-time at night. So it took me, I would say probably about 8 years and 6 different universities and colleges to finish my degree, because I didn't do it the easier way. So to anyone young out there that's listening, stay in school. It's so much easier.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you had this desire and thirst for travel, where did your parents or did people telling you no, that's just stay in school, or were you so adamant that you just needed to do it? Or how was that process like?
So I have, my mom was very adventurous. So my mom was very much about, I'll support you in anything you want to do. And my sister was very studious and actually went to Stanford. And she was very much about go to school and work on, scholarships and getting in school. So I had feedback from both. And I had girlfriends who were going to university, and I had girlfriends going to junior college. And I just kind of took off. I wasn't raised in a family where education was discussed as the primary goal after high school. So it wasn't any pressure from the parents. It was mostly from one of my siblings who understood the value of it.
Interesting. And I'm sure you had, how is that experience traveling the world and just seeing and new cultures and everything? How is that?
It's outstanding. I just can't get enough. It's so interesting because they're usually really long flights, and the traveling part can be tedious. And so you learn a lot about who you are as an individual when you arrive somewhere where you can't speak the language, you can't read the signs, you can't read the map. You check into a hotel and the person behind the counter doesn't speak English. And how I've really learned about who I want to be in the world and how I want to behave and how I want to treat others. So I've really become a very calm, patient, supportive, gentle traveler. I hesitate to say the term, but I do not want to be the ugly American. So I do everything I can to be a kind, gentle traveler to all those that I experience and pass. And it could be people I'm sharing plane with, or it could be the hotel. It could be a driver. There was one time I was in South Korea and trying to get somewhere, and the driver and we could never figure out where I wanted to go could never be conveyed, even though I was showing him my phone map and everything, to the point where he said, "Get out of my car." Like he was gesturing without English, get out of my car. And to be perfectly okay with that and jump out and say, all right, that didn't work out very well. Maybe the next one, and then have a total stranger say, are you having trouble? Can I help you? And have that stranger talk to the new driver and have it all work out. Just always being really open to the challenges is a really fun way to travel.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing. Traveling in general is such a valuable experience. And I can almost guarantee that you probably learned so many valuable lessons about yourself than others would be learning either at that stage of their life, or usually it happens later on. So I think that's a very valuable time. So now take me back to when you came back from traveling and you got your bachelor's in information technology. So why did you choose this topic? What led you to this subject? And yeah.
So in my 20s, I did not originally go into tech work. I went into work that did not require having a college degree. So I was doing sales and marketing for warehousing and distribution services, large trucking fleets that had like 600 long haul trucks. And about 7 or 8 years into it, I tapped out and I realized I don't want to do this rest of my life. I was often the only woman in the room. I was hired to do sales for large trucking companies because I was a woman, because I was a young woman in my 20s. And it became very clear. I was told all kinds of comments about that's why I was hired. And so what my customers were transportation managers, warehouse managers, 100% male. They would allow me the appointments because I was female. They would make very provocative statements, and along with my bosses would make very provocative statements. And it became very clear that I was never going to move up or excel in this role. Where I saw my male peers moving into director, regional manager, VP roles, I wasn't getting it. And I had been told, you won't, because you're a female and we want you out in front of the customers. And so my sister, the same one that went to Stanford and had been encouraging me previously to go to school and go to tech, she invited me to move to the Bay Area and to go to work for the company that she was working for in tech. And so she got me my first job in tech. And there was a lot of negative feedback from my peers, because it was obvious that I had not finished school yet. And that I didn't deserve the role. And I had to work really, really hard to catch up and improve my skill set. And I immediately went back to school at night and kept working on my degree. And that's when I shifted it into a bachelor's into information technology, because I was working with engineers who were doing coding and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't want to be a coder myself, but I wanted to understand what they're doing, because I'm sitting in the room with engineers all day. So I chose that topic specifically so that I would get coding experience. I had to take coding courses and that I speak the language of those that I was working with. So she introduced me to the role of program manager 20 years ago, and I loved it. It was a really good fit for me, and I've done that. I did that for 20 years, and I'm just recently shifted out of that.
Yeah. Wow. So it's such an incredible story, because first of all, SheLeads is all about that, the female leader and being a female leader in any type of role. So I'm wondering, you have experience being the only female in the room and almost having these people surrounding you that doubt you and doubt your skills and doubt your validity to be there. So I want to know, how did you internally deal with it? Did you let it get to you? Or, yeah, just like advice, because unfortunately things still happen nowadays where females are treated like they shouldn't. So I'm wondering, just what advice do you have and how did you deal with it?
So I think everybody processes it differently, and I'm the type of person who I process it as a challenge.
Yeah.
And so being the only female in a very male-dominated environment, I immediately I have that personality that says, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to do this better than you could believe anybody could do this. So I would study, I would work hard, and I wouldn't be loud or disruptive, but I would just prove you wrong over time that I am worth this seat. I will learn, will help others. I deserve it. I may not have gotten here the correct path, but I'll learn it. And so I just went back to school and just started working hard. And then I found allies in the business, and I found those who were very upset with me having that role and not to go near them, and those who were very supportive and willing to sit with me and whiteboard and explain things and tell me which books to read. And so I built that skill over time and just kind of take it as a challenge. I've been doing tech for 20 years at software development and hardware companies, software, hardware. It's all men. I mean, there's very, very small percentage. So even though I switched careers, it still was a very male-dominated space.
Yeah, and I think that outlook you have as a challenge and almost proving them wrong silently. It's not something that you're vocalizing. It's just like, just wait, I'll prove you wrong. I deserve to be here.
Right.
I think that's definitely valuable.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that everybody has that, that wherewithal. And I think for shy women or women coming from other cultures, that it would be even harder. Right. And so I will say I mentor a lot of women and a lot of women from other cultures and coach them through this process to help them build that skill as well.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a good segue into what you do now. So tell me a little bit more about being a global consultant. And I have so many questions around it, but I'm just fascinated by the idea of just teaching all these different cultures about leadership and entrepreneurship. So tell me a little bit more about what you do now.
So I was working for Mantech. I introduced a program from the U.S. State Department called techwomen.org. So techwomen.org is an international exchange program that our State Department funds. And the U.S., bring in 100 women from 20 different countries and drop them into Silicon Valley tech companies for 5 weeks. And they get personal one-on-one mentoring and coaching for their technical skills. And then they also get leadership training and other activities while they're here. So the women who arrive are already skilled professionals. They have a minimum of a bachelor's, 60% of them have masters, 15% of them have PhDs or are CEOs of their own businesses. So they're paired up with professional mentor women with the same background, and that exposed me to women from all different countries, and I loved it. And then we were allowed to go on these delegation trips where we would get to go spend 1 week in their country. And while we're in their country, we would get to run workshops with high school kids or young girls, university women, students about to graduate, and incubators and early entrepreneurs, women who are trying to start businesses. And this is all over the African continent, Middle East, Central Asia, places where women don't often see them in these leadership roles. So that gave me this whole exposure to, I love this work, and I was doing it all pro bono. So I was doing about 200 hours a year of pro bono work, supporting the advancement of women and getting out on as many trips as possible. And I had an outstanding boss that I worked for at Symantec who was very supportive and would help me find ways to make sure that I could go on these trips while working full time. So oftentimes I would be in another time zone, say big time zone, like in Africa, somewhere in Africa, maybe Zimbabwe or South Africa. And we'd be in the lobby at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. We would be out all day long doing activities with women and girls all day. We would get back maybe between 7 and 9 p.m. And then I would log in to my day job. And I would work until midnight or 1 in the morning, trying to make sure that my day job never was impacted by me being on these trips. And that's why I was able to keep doing that. But what it made really clear for me was that I love that work. And so I transitioned it into a full-time job. So last October, I left Symantec, and since then, I have been out traveling around and working with our U.S. embassies because I've had those relationships in my network. I went to Washington, D.C. I tapped into my network, and they provided introductions to another whole set of people I hadn't met before, and they started hiring me and sending me out. And so I've spent the last several months traveling and being paid to do what I love most. Yeah. So it's been thrilling. And then COVID came.
Yes, we can talk about that, but just telling that whole story, that is amazing. And it sounds it's so impactful that all of these females who aren't able to, or like who don't believe in themselves to be a leader, I think that's such a huge impact that you're making in all of these females' lives. So it's amazing. So one thing I'm wondering is, what is the biggest challenge that you find amongst these females across all cultures that you really have to almost like weigh in more when you're teaching them, if any?
I think one of the things that stands out to me is the women that I meet through this program are really strong type A women. They got themselves through school, and the majority of them are married or about to be married. But they are, like, when we go through the selection process, like there's usually about somewhere between 3,000, 3,500 applications, and we pick 100. Wow. So we're picking the cream of the crop each year. And and we're only choosing 5 from each country, and there may have been several hundred applications per country, and we'll pick 5. So you can imagine the type of women we're picking. They're very, very dynamic. They really stand out. They're very strong, and they almost all face the challenges of the culture that they live in. It's not expected for them to excel in business. It is not expected for them to travel without family. Yeah. There is an expectation that they are family first, that some countries it's expected that at the minute you graduate, you get married, and not only that, you move into your husband's family's home, and you are the caregiver for not only him, but his parents and your children. So having that and wanting to have a career is huge. So for me, I think that was the biggest eye-opener, and mentoring these women through how do you get all that done and be successful in your job as well. Yeah. Like you know, when you can't alienate your family, and but you want to be successful.
So that's it's so interesting to me, because like, how did you navigate around these cultural barriers where it's not even the female mindset knowing that, okay, I can devote to my family and my career, but almost changing the cultural mindset, saying this is the mother, but she's also able to be a very professional career and leader in a company or whatever it is. How do you navigate around that?
Well, one angle, one way to go is to talk about the economy and finances. And if she is successful in her career, she is bringing in a substantial salary to that household. If you hold her back, that salary is gone. So you can have her home in the house all day doing the cooking and cleaning, or you can have her helping contribute financially. And I don't think there's any family that is so well off that they say, yeah, we don't need the money, you know. So that is one angle that you can go after. And then I've also seen women who will stand up and push back and say, I understand that's what the culture has been in the past. However, you know, it is whatever, 2020 or, you know, a few years ago. And I want to work. I want to succeed in my career. And so that has to do with having, that they were lucky enough to, or smart enough to pick good partners, and their partners are very supportive of that. And I've seen situations where their partners are very supportive around, okay, we don't have to live in my parents' home. We will live in another home very close to them, and they will help support and defend, for lack of a better word, their partner in front of their parents, which could have some tension to it. But when it's coming from the son, it's listened to more, which is, it's all touchy. I can imagine the comments on a podcast around this. There might be this could go 100 ways south, right?
No, but I think it's so amazing what you're doing in the sense that, because a lot of these countries that you're talking about are still way behind in the perception of females and equality in general. And even in America right now, we're dealing with it with women's soccer and sports about equal pay. So I think it is incredibly impactful because you're not only helping the female realize their potential, but also the cultural and knowing that, okay, it is possible to still keep these roles that we have in our minds, but being able to also fulfill their potential. So I think it's really incredible. So I'm interested in, first, where did this passion for traveling come from for you? Because now you're able to make a living and also make an impact as well as your passion for traveling.
I think because I wasn't exposed to it when I was really young. Like there wasn't, when I was a child growing up, it was just a very middle-class family with 6 children and dad working, 2 or 3 jobs to pay the bills. There was no passports. There was no travel. There was no discussion. I mean, if we did vacation, it was camping down the road, So having no exposure, and then once I got that exposure, it was like, oh, it just really opened it up. And then I think for me, I don't know. And again, I don't want to offend any of the listeners. And I hope that anything that I'm saying is not offensive. It's very general statements and I don't mean to offend at all. And I completely understand in the majority of the cities I'm in, there are the majority of the countries that I visit, when you're in the cities, the women are not being held back. It's more the further away you move from the city, or where some of the constraints are. But having said that, being introduced to women from other countries and getting to be able to meet them and having that relationship be so entirely different from the news we hear about those countries. Yeah. So the news that we get in the United States is really filtered, and there's no good news delivered from countries, for example, in the Middle East or Central Asia or North Africa. We don't get good news from these countries, so our perception's really distorted. Mm-hmm. So if we're not making an effort on our own to get different news or meet people from those countries or have those conversations, our perception will most likely stay distorted. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of citizens, especially in Silicon Valley, who are highly educated and understand this and embrace it and travel and know it. But there's a population that I was a part of that didn't know, didn't have the exposure. And so once I got exposed and once I had those conversations, I became very, very interested. And so I feel like I'm just very late to the game. Yeah. So I'm very aggressive to get in as much as I can.
Yeah. And I think it's very telling. So being firsthand there, seeing it with your own eyes, that's a different story than kind of consuming these news where you don't know what's going into it. So I think that's definitely a big factor in it. So going towards, kind of going back towards being a Globe consultant for these leaders, I'm really fascinated by the perception of failure. And I've talked to a lot of my guests about failure. So I'm interested, how does the perception of failure differ amongst cultures, and what lessons do you teach them about failure?
So it's interesting that you bring it up because I'm working a lot with early entrepreneurs. Yeah, it comes up a lot, and there is a big fear of failure in the community perception and cultural perception of what that means. So one time I had a conversation with someone, and they were saying, you could be a startup pitching in my country and you could nail your pitch and your presentation 90% perfect. And the entire audience will only focus on that 10% that they think you didn't get right. And then another country I was in recently, we talked about risk. Nobody wants to take risk because risk is related to exposure. if you do it wrong, people will see it. And we find these conversations so interesting, especially coming from Silicon Valley, where we just, we thrive on risk and failure and innovation and iterating and give me your feedback. And, so a lot of my talks have shifted. I talk a lot with hundreds and hundreds of university students. And what my messaging has been now is, you are the generation who can change the perception of failure in your society. Yeah. And I encourage every university to create safe spaces for students to try new things and fail safely in a very supportive space. And there's absolutely nothing stopping any university, any student, pool of students at any university anywhere in the world to create that space. You just say, we want to create a space where we can come together. We could try new ideas. It could be products. It could be services. It could be software. It could be programs. Right. It could be anything. But create that space where people can come and think out loud, innovate, get feedback from others, create small teams, and create and innovate and do things and support each other through the failure process and learn from. And so there are some incubators around the world, and some of them have adopted a term called Failure Friday, or they call it something very similar to that. And what they do is they have people who are willing to stand up and say, this is what I did, and this is how I failed, and this is what I learned, and this is what I would do differently. And they share those lessons. And imagine that happening now versus a culture where there's no failure allowed, or it's very poorly perceived. Yeah. And if you did that with thousands of university students around the world, imagine how much these cultures would shift and embrace innovation and startups and iteration and saying, oh yeah, well that didn't work, but he's going to try again. Or, it's just, I think there's huge opportunity to see shifts and changes. And I think a lot of it, the university students having access to the world now, it's possible.
Yeah, I love that. I actually, in a previous episode I had with Tina Seelig, she creates this thing called a failure resume, where you almost write down your failures. And it's great. It's almost this new light where you're open about it and it's okay and you learn from it. And I love it. And I would even argue that you mentioned how universities should have this safe space. I would argue that even elementary education and even younger, there should be this safe space where people feel comfortable failing, and it's not like a mistake. It's not the stigma of failure. Rather, this is great. Right. You have now an opportunity to learn. So I agree. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I do a bunch of STEM workshops with youth in young schools. And I was in Pakistan a few weeks ago, and we went to several primary schools, and we did hands-on STEM activities, which are very typical in our schools here. Yeah. And these children have never, ever, ever once done a hands-on activity, nor had the teachers ever done hands-on activity. Yeah. So having them do the balloon car challenge, which is just empty water bottles, and some, the caps become the wheels and the balloon becomes the power. Yeah. Or the marshmallow challenge has been a common one, or making geodesic domes out of newspapers or straws. So there's a lot of really super low tech, low cost, easy for teachers to embrace hands-on activities. And that's exactly what we're talking to the teachers about, is creating that in every subject, every year, starting as young as possible, so that you raise them all the way through that system. Yeah. I mean, we would have so many innovators.
I know. And so I'm wondering, so I talked to Sylvia Acevedo, the CEO of Girl Scouts, and she talks about this a lot, because that's obviously their mission, to inspire these young girls to go into these STEM-related fields. And a big barrier is this sense of confidence. And almost these girls feel, no, this is not something, I don't play with Legos, that's for the boys in the class to do. And one way she finds that to grow it is almost to have the safe space where it's just girls. Do you do a similar thing, or how do you deal with this confidence barrier?
Yep. I agree with her 100%. And I'll say the Girl Scouts of Northern California, about every other year, they have I forget what they call it exactly, but it's like a STEM career exposure day. Yeah. And I have a table there, and I have servers. So I have a hardware background. And so I open up the lids off of the servers, and in one day we have 700 girls come through, and they get to touch the hardware, and they get to take the processor on and off, and the memory cards and the power supply and everything. And when you bring boys into that room, the girls stop and they step back, and they allow the boys to move in front of them. And so I carry these servers around with me, and I go to after-school programs all around the Bay Area and offer this hands-on STEM activity. And the school or the teacher wants me to do it with boys and girls both. And I always push back, and I said, no, I want the girls by themselves, because I've watched and witnessed it enough times. I can tell you exactly what will happen if you put them together. And the girls will step back, and the boys will do everything. And so I try really, really hard to not mix them. But when I do mix them, I put a mentor at each table, and I tell them, your job is to make sure the girls stay engaged and that you make sure that they're taking equal turns. It makes a huge difference.
It's so important. I think it's very, I think that's so valuable. So looking back now at your career when you started traveling the world instead of pursuing the conventional education path, what would you tell your younger self at that time?
I think stay in school. I really have to say that not staying in school directly after high school really impacted my ability to be successful in my career. I didn't finish my bachelor's until my 30s, and then I didn't have enough funding and married with kids to try to go do the master's. It just wasn't feasible for me. And there wasn't a lot of funding available to pay for that once you get into your 30s. And so I say stay in school, number one, and get the degrees. And if you can go beyond a bachelor's degree, if you have any opportunity to be able to pull that off, do it. And do it while you're young, and do it before you get married. Do it before you have kids.
No,
I cannot tell you how hard it is to do it at night school when you have kids at home and you're working full time.
So before we even get to the last fun question, I do want to ask you, so during this period of your life where you were doing work, you were going to night school, there was a lot going on, it seemed. How did you take care of yourself and make sure, okay, my well-being is a priority and I'm okay? How did you do that?
I didn't. There's a weird thing that kicks in, and women who have done what I've done know exactly what I'm talking about. You just find the wherewithal every day to get up, no matter how early it is, to get it all done. Like you buy the groceries, you're feeding the kids, you're taking care of the house, you're working full time, and you're finishing courses at night or on Saturdays. And there is absolutely no time left in that type of cycle for my personal, like, take a yoga class or walk around the block. Or, I mean, it just does not exist. Reality is it doesn't exist. And you just push your way through that no matter how long it takes, and you get it done. And then when you're on the done side of it and you look back at it, like, you can't figure out, how did I do that? I don't know. I have no idea how I did that. But women who've done it understand that, what I'm talking about. Like, and I've imagined, like, university students feel the same way when they're pushing through the very, very end, and they're trying to figure out, where am I going to work next? And I got to get my finals done, and I got to figure out where I'm going to live. And, like, it's that same kind of, like, all at once, this monster pressure, and you just do it.
Yeah. I can definitely relate in the sense that being a college and a student athlete with soccer and school and an internship, definitely that sense where I don't know how I did that, but I did. So we're done now. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. So looking at now, what is a passion or hobby that you have that's just completely unrelated to your work?
So it's funny because my passion and hobby was working with helping advance the status of women and girls is my passion. And it was my pro bono hobby. And I have now turned that into a job. So it's an interesting question. So then I'm like, well, then what else do I do? You know, and it's pretty much I'm really passionate about a strong network of strong women that are very supportive of each other and constantly nurturing that network and keeping us together and figuring out ways. Like during this sheltering in place, I bought a bunch of postcards and hand wrote postcards to, several dozen women that are important to me. And I find ways to keep that network of women strong and there for each other. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important. So as a last question, which by the way, Eileen, I've absolutely loved this, so thank you for coming onto the show. So last question is, what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about? So I'm gonna go first. So I have a talent of blueberry throwing. So I'm going to show it to you. So we'll do a live demo right now. Okay, here we go. There we go. Success.
I'm going to say, as a mom, I watch that and I think, don't show it.
It's okay. I have years of practice. No choking at all. It's all fine.
So, those who know me well know this talent, but a lot of people don't. Okay. I do headstands, and I love to do headstands in all the different countries that I travel to.
Oh my
so I have this private little photo album of me doing headstands all over.
That's amazing. I love it. Just anywhere randomly, you just go into a headstand?
Yes, so it could be in the front of the hotel lobby, or it could be in the middle of a grass that we may be on a walk, and like when we were in DC at the Lincoln Memorial, or
that's great,
or anywhere.
Oh, that's so fun, and I love how you've taken a picture. So it must be pretty fun to see all your different headstands around the world.
The people who are with me are mortified. They're like, no, don't do it. Oh, God, there she goes. But for me, my own little silliness, it's my little collection of fun.
I love that. That's a great one. Well, Eileen, thank you again. I'm so excited to share this with others just so they can learn so much. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. So thank you for coming onto the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, you too.